My name is Donnie Hagenbart, I'm an alcoholic. And I'm going to talk about my experience with Suboxone, not because I think it's the answer, but it's my story, and it's what happened with me. In 2009, I had been using heroin for a few years, and my life had fallen apart, as for most people, that's what happens. But my number one fear was withdrawal. What was going to happen? I knew I wasn't going to die, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't go through the withdrawal. And I had a life. I had my parents, I had a brother, I had school, I had a job, and I couldn't lose those things. So inpatient treatment was not an option for me. And so I heard about Suboxone. It had recently become a hot topic between me and my friends. And so I went to a psychiatrist. You know, for me, I wanted the easier, softer way. You know, I had picked up drugs and alcohol as a solution. You know, a pill. A pill was going to save my life. A beer was going to save my life. The feelings I had inside were going to go away if I had that substance. And so why wouldn't Suboxone work? You know, it had worked for me in the past. And so I went to a psychiatrist, and you know, it seemed as though my prayers were answered. So at that time, I'll get a little specific. I had been using heroin for 2 years, and I was using about 2 grams a day. And I went to a psychiatrist, and he prescribed me 24 milligrams of Suboxone, 8 milligrams in the morning, 8 milligrams at 3 p.m., and 8 milligrams before bed. I didn't know any different. What I did know, it was $15 a pill, and I didn't want to put that financial crisis on my parents. And my family did not want to go through insurance because they didn't want the insurance company to know that their son from the suburbs of Chicago was a heroin addict. And day one, I took my 8 milligrams of Suboxone at 8 a.m. in the morning, and everything was good. I was not sick. Now, I was a drug addict, and I always wanted more of everything. And what was surprising to me was that I was prescribed 3 of the pills every single day. And I took 1, and that was all that I needed. I didn't take the other 2. Now, yes, there was a financial piece to that, but I didn't need those other 16 milligrams. And so that was informational for me. What I found was how strong this drug was. And, you know, I had been spending $200 a day on heroin, and this $15 pill made all the sickness go away. And I thought I found the answer. This was the cure. I could live my life. And things got better. I started getting straight A's. I started applying for schools. I started playing college baseball again. Things progressively got a little bit better. And I was going to 12-step meetings. I was meeting with a therapist. And somewhere along the line, what I thought was better, I started wanting more. There was still that emptiness inside. I had to wake up every day and take this pill. And I felt trapped. I felt like a slave, again, to something on a daily basis. And so through the work with my psychiatrist, and we put together a plan for me to get off Suboxone. You know, the plan at the beginning was that I was going to be on it for 2 years. And at this point, I was on it for 6 months. And so we were going to start the weaning down process. And so I went from 8 milligrams a day And then I went from 6 milligrams a day for a month. And then I went to 4 for a month, and 2, and so on, and all the way till half a milligram of Suboxone. And things were good. Even on half a milligram of Suboxone, things were good. I wasn't sick. I was still in school. I was still attending meetings, but I felt judged. And whether that was coming from myself or whether that was coming from outside, I don't know. But it was still, it was there. And then it became time for me to get off of the Suboxone. And I was a full-time student. I was living away from home. I was playing college baseball. To the outside world, my life was great, but on the inside, I wasn't. You know, the last 8 months, you know, I got the physical things back in my life, but I still felt empty. I still felt depressed. I still felt like an outsider, even with AA, even with a therapist. And then I got off the Suboxone, and I went through 3 weeks of some of the worst withdrawals I've ever been through. Now, I had withdrawn from heroin 100 times in my life. And those were 5 to 7 days of excruciating pain, and then I got through it. But with Suboxone, it was 3 weeks of 75% of that excruciating pain, a more drawn-out withdrawal. And it got to the point, week 2, I said, if this keeps up any longer, I'm going back to heroin. I can't do this anymore. And week 3 came, and it hadn't gotten any better. And so I went back to heroin. I figured, hey, if I, A, can get high a few more times, and B, I can handle a 4 or 5 day withdrawal, that's what I'm going to do. And I went back to heroin, and I did exactly what was up on the board. I would use heroin once or twice a week, and I would use Suboxone in between. And what I then found out was it started to click. I started to think. An addict started to think, and you know where that goes. And what I found was that this powerful 8 milligram pill that I took a third of, you know, I took a third of the dose that was given to me as a drug addict. I think that speaks to how strong that pill was, but I started to think, if it was working so well, what else could I do with this drug? Could I snort it? Could I IV it? And so I logged on to bluelight.com or whatever the website is that has drug interaction stories or whatever it was. And I logged on and I looked up people's experiences with Suboxone and abusing it and snorting it or IVing it or whatever. And I started experimenting, as I did as a young kid with every drug in the cabinet. And found that you could get high, found that you could snort it, and found that you could IV it. And I then spent the next 6 months breaking my 8 milligram Suboxone pill into 30 or 40 pieces. And I would IV this drug 5 to 10 times a day. And this 8 milligram pill would last me 4 to 5 days. One 8 milligram pill would last me 4 to 5 days. And I mean, I think that speaks to what this drug is. And through that process, I was doing that 4 to 5 days a week. I was doing heroin 2 days a week. And as you guys can imagine, my life came to rock bottom once again. With 2 overdoses, a totaled car, broken relationships, failing out of school, and it was time to do something different. But what I did know is that Suboxone wasn't my answer. A pill was not my answer. I had been thinking a pill or a drink was my answer for far too long. And so I checked myself into detox, and I checked myself into a 30-day program, and then I checked myself into Jaywalker Lodge in Carbondale, Colorado. And my sobriety date is February 28th, 2010. So yeah, that's just my experience, whether neither right nor wrong. So thank you.
Here's your room key.
You don't want that?
Okay, thank you, Donnie. Next up, Dr. Alan Nelson. He is the medical director at Jaywalker Lodge. He's a world-class psychiatrist and a dear, dear friend that I think you guys will all enjoy. I'm also electronically challenged.
I'm computer illiterate. Is John around anywhere? John disappeared. Man, this could give you anxiety because I can't even open my program here. I function F5, but please start with Rocky Mountain High. Okay, there we go. And I need your little. Well, it's not on there yet. Cool. And do I have a clicker? Pat, thank you. I'm Alan Nelson. I'm a husband. I'm a father, also now a grandfather. I'm a psychiatrist from time to time, and I have the privilege of working at Jaywalker Lodge with Dirk and these kind of guys. When I talk about addictions, I always like to talk about the fact that we are wired to feel an incredible array of emotional experiences. Of love, of what it feels like to be loved, of holding a baby, of tasting good food. There's a visible spectrum of light, and there's a spectrum of emotions that we are wired for that is so beautiful to help control pain, to help us love music, to help us love living by a river in Colorado. And even though it's 117 here yesterday and this furnace-like heat, I thought since we can't take you to Colorado, I would start by bringing a little bit of Colorado to you. Doesn't John music still move you? We'll start with my awareness that I know what Dirk has said. I know this is an emotional topic. I know there are strongly held opinions. I know that some of you feel that if we don't get more understanding of the regular use, habitual use of Suboxone, that we will be responsible for deaths. I know some people hold that very strongly. So you don't need to inform me of that. You don't need to poke your finger at me or hit me in the chest and say, dude, wake up, I don't think you're with it. I know that what loved ones think. I also know that we have very different conclusions about how to treat what is legitimately a huge problem in America. Here are my concerns. I could end the slide presentation with this. Suboxone is not a bad medication. This is not an anti-Suboxone lecture. You can misuse anything. Cell phones, the internet. My issue is the length of treatment with Suboxone. And I'll use Suboxone because if I say buprenorphine more than 3 times, my lips will fall off. So, who's going to dispense this? It used to be you got to follow 10, and then you're going to follow 100, then you're going to follow 300, and you watch. I think the progression will be that 300 will be small, and that will not need to be physician monitored. It could be prescribed and dispensed by your PA and charged a physician's fee. Outcomes related to that length of treatment. How can you relapse if you're already on our heroin? And what is the defined goal? And lastly, follow the financial incentives and professional peer pressure. There are both. There are financial incentives for me to triple my income. There is professional peer pressure. Bullies just don't exist in elementary school and high school. This is from the late 50s. the late 50s, the back of a Life magazine. My point is that medicine, us as physicians, has a very poor history about predicting what's going to be a troubling or addictive substance. Just briefly, as you will recall, heroin, developed in Germany by Dr. Wright, was a safe and non-addictive substitute for the addictions of morphine, particularly in England. Heroin is not an original substance from the poppy. There's only two original substances from the poppy, which are morphine and opium, but heroin was meant to help. Heroin has been abused, unfortunately. Humans can make anything that was right wrong. History of amphetamines. My father-in-law, who is 92 and a retired orthopedic surgeon, served in World War II, and they gave him amphetamines during patrol at night, said it would keep him awake and they're not addictive. He later went on to medical school, and the medical schools gave it to them during test week and said this will help you study and keep you awake. They gave him 10 pills, not a whole lot, but you don't have to worry about this because these amphetamines are not addictive. Then there are partially synthetic opiates. Came out in the late 90s. You know them all, Vicodin, Percocet, hydrocodone. I lived in that era. One of my best friends is an anesthesiologist. These were meant to help. These are going to get people out of the hospital bed sooner so they don't get pulmonary emboli, so they get ambulatory and breathe on their own better. And we were not told they're going to be that addictive. They were meant to help. And now we can do fully synthetic opioids. They bear no resemblance chemically. Fully synthetic means they bear no resemblance chemically to opium or morphine, the two original compounds. And these are really powerful, as the death of Prince attributes. At least 100 times more powerful than morphine. What are the goals of recovery? Do you just want to be able to function and get to work? Do you want to pull a Donnie? Thank you, Donnie. That was beautiful. Or do you have to develop a sense of serenity? And I added the last, a balanced life requires character, and that's hard to come by. You can't get an implant of character. Remember Lawrence Kohlberg, moral development? He had 9 stages of moral development. This is from my old psychology textbook of 1970. He said to become an successful individual adult, you have to have values and beliefs and thinking abilities that guide our behavior. You have to develop what Kohlberg called a moral way of thinking. Not only guide our behavior, but help us understand what the consequences of our behavior might be should we look down the line what would happen. Erik Erikson, the personality theorist, said that in early adulthood, a successful adult would have achieved 3 things. They would have had a sense of personal identity, what he called the formation of a principled hierarchy of values. Second, they would have developed autonomy from their cultural, spiritual, or parental backgrounds. Their beliefs would have become internalized. I think maturity happens somewhere around 50, not 23, but Erik Erikson says personal identity, autonomy, and lastly, integrity. The major problem facing young adults is that of obtaining gratification from intimacy and solidarity with others rather than withdrawal from partnership and becoming social and personally isolated. And that's what happens in addiction. You withdraw from others and you become personally, socially, and spiritually isolated. But wait a minute. This is all genetics, right? Get with it, Get a buccal smear done, send some saliva off, get with the science. Character formation is nice, but it's all about genetics, right? Nora Volkow at NIDA, the rock star of NIDA in the U.S. Dirk, you referred to this earlier. that biopsychosocial framework acknowledges that while addiction can be treated medically, preventing it requires addressing those psychosocial and psychological determinants. In fact, this forms the cornerstone of today's preventive science. Social environments affect the function of neurocircuitry and even the expression of genes. Do you believe that? I thought it's genetic, you're hardwired, it's going to happen, right? Not so. This field is called epigenetics. That your social environment can affect the function of neurocircuitry and in the expression of genetics and genes. I have a fundamental problem with treating addictions with another addictive substance. And when I made up this program, I thought, is that what we're coming to? For alcoholics, we're just going to have an infusion of Jack Daniels. And for, benzo addicts, we'll just put long-term diazepam, there'll be no withdrawal. Is that the direction we're going? And it really troubles me that I started this with a sense of humor and found out that, yes, sadly, that is the direction that we're going. 2 articles within the last month. The American Journal of Psychiatry in May of 2006, last month, there's an article about treating treatment-resistant depression. Right? Psychiatrists like to help that. Probably a third of patients are treatment-resistant. So at Mass General and Harvard, Mario Fava, who I think is usually a very good researcher, you know how they're treating treatment-resistant depressions? To get them to feel better right away, they're using Suboxone in addition to antidepressants. And I thought, what? So then I read the editorial. It said, well, the issue of creating opiate dependency in depressed people will have to be addressed at a later date because we're just not sure that's going to happen yet. JAMA Psychiatry last month. A group in Toronto is treating treatment-resistant depression, a very noble goal. Do you know how they're treating treatment-resistant depression? By letting patients come into the clinic and inject themselves in the butt or in the thigh with pharmaceutical-grade heroin. And their Montgomery scores and their Hamilton scores are all better. They're less depressed if you compared them with other subjects. And I thought, psychiatry, what are you doing? I mean, you'd think I'd be hip with this because, psychiatrists, the more drugs, the better, right? Live better chemically. It troubles me. This is my field. New York Times article about 10 days ago. New York Times called Addicted to a Treatment for Addiction. About that people are becoming so emotionally and financially invested in medication-assisted treatment, that they're unwilling to look at other topics. Medically assisted treatment, to me, is not medically assisted treatment. I am telling you, there's a political and a financial war going on here. I think it is medically dominated treatment. In that, in order to get part of your share of the pie, a part of $1 billion of the federal program, if your clinic is not going to have medically assisted treatment, federal funds are going to be cut off to you. They will not pay for other psychosocial treatments if you don't sign up first for MAT. Do you think this is paranoia? I think it's a political and a financial threat. This is from the New York Times. This is not from Nelson. Dr. Andrew Koldatry, and I want you to remember the name and the title here, is the executive director in New York for responsible opioid prescribing. Executive director for responsible opioid prescribing, and this is his thoughts as he expresses them in the article. When there's really dangerous heroin on the streets, like some of it isn't dangerous and it's just child's play, but When there's really dangerous heroin out the streets, I'd rather see Suboxone out there, even if it's being prescribed irresponsibly, or even if it's being sold by drug dealers. From the Office of Professional Prescribing for Opiates. This is medically monitored treatment. Here we go. Buprenorphine is not bad. You don't have to take me on about that. Is prolonged treatment just delaying the inevitable? Wasn't Donnie going to have more time on Suboxone to learn how to develop skills of communication and skills of intimacy and a moral way of thinking and a way of anticipating consequences? Now, the bottom line is that if there were really well-controlled studies, by that I mean age-related, gender-related, addiction-related, socioeconomically related, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies that said, look, people on Suboxone who stay on Suboxone for 6 months and then get off Suboxone have a 90% chance of sobriety 5 years later. If that were there, I think we'd all be on board with that. If we knew for sure, if evidence was beyond a reasonable doubt, we would all be in agreement, and this argument would be over. That's going to be a very hard study to do because addicts don't like responding to surveys much. Treatment providers who do not go along with medically assisted treatment, and such a kind word, will be classified as archaic. Dirk and I never looked at each other's slides before we did this. This is my thinking. You will be classified as archaic and out of touch with real science. I mean, you know, I want to have pictures of guys at jaywalkers in white lab coats looking at test tubes, and microscopes. And that we're living in the past. Psychosocial treatments are cool. That was nice when we had nothing else better. But now we know the biology of the mind, and we know how neurocircuitry works. And long-term medication is the answer, right? In fact, you can now have an implant put in your arm of Suboxone. It looks about the size of a toothpick, a little bit thicker in diameter, lasts 6 months. If you do that, then the rest of your psychosocial treatments at your clinic will get funded. If you don't do that, you will not get government funding. If you don't do that, in New York, they told them, we are going to cut off funding your drug courts. You get in line with MAT, or we're going to cut off funding your drug courts, or we're going to defund the judges that are doing those courts. The states are going to have to pay for it. So the goals of treatment determine the methods of treatment. The goals of the treatment determine how you define success. And the goals of treatment give you another government buzzword, value-based reimbursement. Get on board with our program, which is called value-based, or you will not be reimbursed, doc, and neither will your clinic. Isn't that unfortunate? I mean, who's driving the cart here? I believe, in summary, based on the goals of sobriety, serenity, and character, that there is a place for short-term, acute phase of a medically supervised detoxification combined with an abstinent step-based treatment that give the individual the best chance of having long-term recovery and of having 3 things from a jaywalker slide that I stole directly from the website, of having a true purpose in life, of having serious joy, not just a chemical joy, and of having a real experience and not just a chemically induced experience. Thank you. We'd be glad to take whatever questions that you have. If you're exhausted, you can just leave too. Anything for Dirk or myself or Donnie? Yes.
It's not a question, it's just a statement. I'm a PhD psychologist, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I just want to say I 100% agree with everything you guys said. Thank you for coming here and speak.
Thank you. You're very kind. Yes.
Why do you think the federal government didn't support adult sobriety and the free items for $36 billion a year response in 2014 was made $1.5 billion. Why do you suppose the government chose and rather than, because 12 steps has they had lobbies that could have had a voice and maybe one that may therefore got the support?
Could you hear his question? Let me try to repeat that. Why do I think that the government chose to support a medically assisted treatment when there were also lobbies for 12-step and other alternative programs? Why do I think they chose that? I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think they chose that because they saw this as killing so many people that there's an epidemic. They're going to try to make a serious intervention as an emergency measure. I think that's why they did it.
And if I can add, the government wants a quick fix. That's an easier, softer way to fix the problem.
I think it can be part of the help. I don't think it's the entire treatment. Suboxone is not a bad thing. It can be a life-saving thing. It's the length of treatment and the outcomes you're looking for.
Good question.
Yeah, fair question. Yes.
There's something in between, there's something where two sides meet in the middle and negotiate on terms, not like Washington or Sacramento or whatever, where they're constantly picking sides. And it's adversarial. We need some more advocates to bring it to the center and know that there's a place for harm reduction. We've got to figure it out. Right? Abstinence. I'm a recovering alcoholic who's over for 32 years, that's over in AA. But I'm also a therapist, and I understand harm reduction has its place. Just like the neighbor exchanges or whatever it may be. So, we've got to quit, all or nothing thinking it can get us any place except nothing. So, yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Well said. Anything else? Yes.
One last call here.
Do you feel that these two modalities need to be mutually exclusive? And as I look at this and non-mandatory and thank you, I wonder what the outcome is going to be if we're truly impaired. What are the limitations similar to what is what's your take on that?
My first take is that the government is intolerant of funding anything but that. I'll just be honest with you. I think I'm more open to using it in acute situations, in acute detox. But the government said on the reverse is not true. Once again, it's not a bad medication. It's the misuse of something that I think can be helpful. But don't think there's not a political and a financial war here and peer pressure. I don't think I'm paranoid, but maybe I need some Lunesta, or something. Latuda. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
I just want to say thank you very much for being here and your presentation. And I just want to follow up on what this other gentleman shared, which is, I think this is a great option for people who want abstinence and are willing to do what I would call the deeper work in a 12-step program. But there's a huge percentage of people that are not interested in that, and we need to help and address those people as well. So I would love to hear about, what are your solutions for helping find this middle ground? And from my perspective, one option is train doctors to better understand and inform their clients, because I talk to people every day, all day. I work for an ibogaine clinic in Mexico. We help a lot of people that are on methadone and Suboxone. They've been on it for 5 years, for 10 years. They have no idea how to get off. They were never told it was addictive or problematic. Of course, exactly what your client shared. So I would say, and the doctors are either totally in denial or they are believing the big fat lie that this is not a problem. So it seems like that middle ground includes another perspective other than what the pharmaceutical companies are offering on this. And I would love to hear any other solutions they have.
Well, I love your question, and I think the first part of it, where doctors need to become more well-educated, is absolutely key. And as far as a middle ground between medicated assisted therapy and 12-step based therapy, I go to a place of spirituality. I mean, to me, spirituality is not connected to the 12 steps. It's a separate puzzle piece of anyone's recovery. To find peace, to find serenity through whatever modality works for you. I think our job, my covenant, is to model a healthy, attractive, well-balanced life to those that I'm caring for. And to me, that's going to transcend medication, it's going to transcend the 12 steps, it's going to transcend everything, because you're simply, as we say, walking the walk in a humble, authentic way that hopefully to somebody that's paralyzed by our disease is going to be attractive enough to pull somebody forward into a life of purpose. Is that fair as a middle ground? I mean, to me, that's not a 12-step regimented piece. That's showing up in space and having a loving, open heart that you're willing to share with somebody that's suffering.